Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for what I think is going to be a pretty lively discussion about artificial intelligence and war, a topic that's been getting a lot of attention lately, especially with all the headlines about Iran's drone attacks and the Pentagon's recent spat with Anthropic. I'll start by framing the big picture. AI isn't just some new tool for data analysis anymore, it's actually reshaping how wars are fought. From autonomous drones to decision support systems that can compress a kill chain from hours into minutes, we're at a point where machines can influence battlefield outcomes in ways that were unthinkable even a decade ago. That's both exciting and scary, but I think the upside is huge: reduced casualties for our own forces, more precise strikes, and better intelligence processing.
I'm glad you brought up those points, Alex, because that's exactly where my concerns start. Sure, AI can help with data crunching, but when we talk about autonomous weapons or systems that can decide to fire on their own, we're stepping into a moral minefield. The whole idea of kill chain compression sounds efficient, but it also raises the question: who's accountable if an algorithm misidentifies a target and kills civilians? And let's not forget that the very same technology that can help us is being used by adversaries like Iran to launch thousands of cheap drones that are already causing real damage. So while we're excited about efficiency, I'm worried about escalation, loss of human oversight, and how these tools might be misused or trigger unintended conflicts.
Those are valid points from both sides. My take is that AI in warfare isn't an either-or proposition. It's a spectrum where we need robust governance to keep the benefits while minimizing the risks. The Iran conflict is a textbook case of how quickly technology can shift the balance. Their Shah drones, especially the newer variants with Jetson Orin chips and thermal cameras, have turned a low-cost platform into something that can autonomously target infrastructure without human input. That's a game changer for asymmetric warfare. But at the same time, it also forces us to rethink how we design defense systems. We're moving from shoot everything that flies to evaluate intent in real time. And when you look at the DoD-Anthropic dispute, you see a clash of cultures. One side, the Pentagon, wants unrestricted access to AI for national security, while the other, Anthropic, is setting ethical red lines around surveillance and autonomous lethal use. That's a perfect storm that highlights why we need policy frameworks that balance innovation with accountability.
Absolutely, Kim. Let's dig into Iran's drone campaign first because it's the most concrete example of AI in war right now. Remember how The Guardian reported on March 3rd that the US Central Command used Anthropic's Claude to assess intelligence and identify targets for strikes against Iranian positions. That means a large language model was actually feeding into real-time decision-making, shortening the kill chain dramatically. On the other side, Iran's Shah 136 drones are now equipped with NVIDIA Jetson Orin chips that can process video feeds on board and recognize heat signatures, so they're not just dumb cruise missiles anymore, they're semi-autonomous. That blurs the line between a simple drone strike and an AI-enabled weapon system.
And that's exactly why I'm uneasy. When you have a swarm of drones, each with onboard AI capable of target recognition, you lose the traditional human-in-the-loop safeguard. Even if the system requires a final human approval before firing, the AI can still pre-select targets and influence the decision in subtle ways we might not fully understand. Moreover, consider the legal frameworks. International humanitarian law mandates distinction and proportionality, but how do you enforce those principles when the target selection is partly algorithmic? The fact that Iran's drones are cheap, manufactured in a factory with minimal oversight, makes them an attractive option for any state or non-state actor wanting to circumvent traditional deterrence mechanisms.
That brings up another layer, the governance of AI. We see this same tension in the Pentagon-Anthropic dispute. The DoD labeled Anthropic a supply chain risk last week, which is normally reserved for foreign adversaries. Anthropic argued that this designation was ideologically motivated and infringed on First Amendment rights. Their lawsuit claims that the Pentagon's blacklisting violates their free speech and commercial interests. On the other hand, Pete Hegseth told reporters that the US military should have unrestricted access to AI for any lawful purpose. The core of the conflict is about who gets to set the rules, the private vendor or the government.
Right, and from a purely operational perspective, the Pentagon's stance makes sense. If we're going to rely on cutting-edge AI for targeting, intelligence synthesis, and even autonomous swarm control, we can't have arbitrary restrictions that hamper our warfighting capabilities. Anthropic's red lines, no mass surveillance of Americans and no fully autonomous lethal weapons, are understandable from a corporate ethics standpoint, but they also limit the utility of their models in defense contexts where you need to process massive amounts of data quickly. If the Pentagon had to go through an extra layer of approval for every deployment, we'd be slower than our adversaries.
But isn't that exactly why we're seeing this supply chain risk label? The Pentagon is trying to ensure that any AI system they integrate into their warfighting architecture has built-in safeguards. They're not just looking at the technology's capabilities, they're also scrutinizing its origins, potential for misuse, and how it could be weaponized against us or used in ways that violate human rights. The fact that Anthropic's models have been used to generate targeted content, like deepfakes or propaganda, makes it legitimate for a national security agency to impose restrictions. If the Pentagon were to hand over full control to any private vendor, we'd risk ending up with AI systems that can autonomously decide on lethal force without human oversight.
That's where I think the middle ground lies, establishing a clear set of standards and audit mechanisms for AI used in defense. For example, the US could adopt a trusted AI certification process similar to how we certify nuclear weapons or cybersecurity frameworks. Anthropic could agree to provide transparency reports on their model training data, explainability dashboards for target selection algorithms, and real-time monitoring of decision logs. The Pentagon could then approve usage under strict conditions, human in the loop for any lethal decision, rigorous red team testing against adversarial scenarios, and continuous oversight by independent auditors.
That would also address the legal concerns that Anthropic raised in their lawsuit. If we can demonstrate that the AI system is subject to human review and that there are fail-safe mechanisms, like a kill switch or a requirement for multiple operators to confirm a target before launch, we could satisfy both parties. After all, the ultimate goal is to reduce casualties and increase precision, not just to have an unfiltered AI model at our disposal.
I'm still skeptical about how effective such safeguards can be when the system is deployed in a fast-moving conflict environment. The human operators might be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data. They could become desensitized or rely too heavily on the algorithm's recommendation. That's why some experts argue for human in the loop to be redefined as human in the decision chain, meaning that humans must actively evaluate the AI output, not just sign off at the end. And in a scenario where an adversary is launching thousands of drones simultaneously, like Iran did over the Gulf, the window for human decision becomes narrow.
That's precisely why we need to invest in better user interfaces and decision support tools that can help operators interpret AI outputs quickly. For example, using explainable AI XAI techniques to highlight which features led a model to flag a target as high value could reduce cognitive overload. Additionally, integrating real-time countermeasure data, like GPS spoofing attempts or electronic warfare signatures, into the decision system would provide a more holistic picture. These aren't just theoretical. Some defense labs are already experimenting with augmented reality dashboards that overlay AI predictions on live feeds.
And let's not forget the broader geopolitical implications. Iran's use of AI-enabled drones has already disrupted global oil supply chains by targeting shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. That shows how a relatively inexpensive platform can have strategic-level effects, forcing US and allied forces to divert resources to air defense and counter-drone operations. If other states adopt similar technology, Russia with its kamikaze drones in Ukraine, or China with its growing UAV industry, they'll create a new kind of low-cost asymmetry that can outpace traditional conventional forces.
That's why the international community should consider updating conventions on armed conflict to include autonomous weapons. The 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, has been discussing non-human decision-making for years, but progress has stalled. We need a binding framework that sets minimum thresholds for human control, transparency, and accountability. Without such standards, we risk an arms race where states deploy more autonomous systems to outmaneuver each other, while the civilian population bears the brunt of collateral damage.
Agreed, but we also must be realistic about enforcement. Nations will still develop AI capabilities clandestinely or through dual-use commercial channels. That's why a multi-layered approach is necessary. Domestic regulations that require AI vendors to self-audit and report, international agreements that set shared norms, and robust verification mechanisms, like independent third-party audits, data provenance checks, and continuous monitoring of deployed systems. The DoD-Anthropic dispute actually highlights how commercial entities can push back against government restrictions if they feel those restrictions are unjust. We need to ensure that any legal or regulatory measures don't stifle innovation while still protecting national security.
And speaking of innovation, we should also highlight the positive side. AI is enabling new defensive capabilities, like swarm-based air defense systems that can track and intercept thousands of drones simultaneously. The US has been developing unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, that act as kill boxes for incoming threats. Think of the LUCAS program, where low-cost UAVs are used to simulate drone attacks and test defenses. This is a direct countermeasure to Iran's cheap drones, but it also relies on AI to process sensor data in real time. So the technology is double-edged. The same tools that empower adversaries can be leveraged defensively if we design them correctly.
That's true, but the cost and complexity of building such defensive systems are high. And when you consider budget constraints, a lot of militaries might prioritize offensive capabilities, like autonomous drones, to stay ahead. If we only focus on defense, we risk becoming reactive rather than proactive. The real question is, do we have the policy infrastructure to ensure that AI weapons are used responsibly? Or are we simply chasing technological superiority without addressing the underlying ethical and legal dilemmas?
Which brings us back to the crux of the Doodie Anthropic case, the balance between national security interests and corporate responsibility. Anthropic's lawsuit underscores a fundamental tension. How do you enforce supply chain risk labels on a US company? The court will have to decide whether such a designation can be applied without infringing on free speech or commercial rights. That decision will ripple through future contracts. If the court sides with the Pentagon, it could open the door for more blacklisting of AI firms that refuse to comply with certain military requirements. If it sides with Anthropic, it may embolden companies to push back against government demands, potentially slowing down the integration of AI into defense.
The outcome will also influence how quickly we can deploy AI in future conflicts. If the legal environment becomes more restrictive, we might see a slowdown in adopting advanced LLMs for target analysis or mission planning. That could leave us at a disadvantage against adversaries who are willing to integrate AI rapidly, even if it means taking higher risks.
And that's exactly why I'm calling for caution. The speed of integration must be matched by speed in governance. We need clear guidelines that prevent the kind of AI weaponization we're seeing with Iran and other states, while still allowing legitimate defensive uses. Otherwise, we risk a future where autonomous systems are used indiscriminately, leading to unintended escalation.
So what does a balanced policy look like? First, define tiers of AI capability. From basic data analysis, no direct decision-making, to semi-autonomous targeting requires human confirmation. Each tier would have corresponding oversight requirements. Second, establish an independent AI defense board that reviews all new contracts involving AI, ensuring they meet safety and ethical standards. Third, create a public transparency portal where companies disclose their training data sets, bias mitigation measures, and audit results. That would give policymakers confidence in the technology while protecting commercial interests.
And from a military perspective, we'd need to incorporate these policies into procurement processes, so that when we award contracts for AI systems, we automatically enforce those oversight mechanisms. The Pentagon can also invest in its own AI research labs to develop proprietary models under strict internal guidelines, reducing dependence on external vendors and mitigating supply chain risks.
But we must be careful not to create a black market of AI weapons that operate outside regulation. That's why the international community needs to collaborate on norms, perhaps through an updated CCW protocol or a new treaty that specifically addresses autonomous weapons. Enforcement could involve sanctions for states that deploy fully autonomous lethal systems without human oversight.
And let's not forget the civilian dimension. As AI becomes more pervasive in defense, we must ensure that its use doesn't infringe on privacy rights or civil liberties. The controversy over Anthropic's potential use of models for mass surveillance of Americans is a prime example. If we allow unchecked access to powerful LLMs, there's a risk of misuse by both state and non-state actors.
That's why transparency and accountability are key. Companies like Anthropic can publish model cards that detail data provenance, intended use cases, and limitations. The government can require such disclosures as part of contract eligibility. That way, we reduce the risk of hidden biases or malicious uses while still benefiting from advanced AI capabilities.
In short, we're at a crossroads. Embrace AI to gain strategic advantages or tighten controls to prevent misuse. The Iran war shows us that adversaries can quickly adopt low-cost AI solutions, and the Doodie Anthropic dispute illustrates how domestic policy can get tangled up in these issues. We need a proactive, multi-layered approach, technical safeguards, legal frameworks, and international cooperation to navigate this new battlefield.
Exactly, and while we're debating policy, let's also keep an eye on technological developments that could change the game again, like quantum computing potentially breaking current cryptographic systems, or advances in edge AI that make autonomous decision-making even more robust. The policies we establish today will need to be flexible enough to adapt to those future shifts.
Great point. We've covered a lot. The mechanics of AI in war, Iran's drone campaign, the Dudi Anthropic controversy, governance frameworks, and international norms. I think it's clear that there isn't a single answer, just a complex set of trade-offs that we must manage carefully.
I agree that this is a complex issue, but my core takeaway remains. Without stringent safeguards and clear accountability, the very technologies meant to protect us could become weapons against our own people or destabilize global security. We need to act now to establish those safeguards before it's too late.
And from my side, I'd say we must move forward with a balanced strategy, leveraging AI for precision and efficiency, while embedding robust ethical, legal, and technical controls. Only then can we harness the benefits of AI in warfare without succumbing to its risks.
Thank you both for your thoughtful perspectives. It's clear that as AI continues to permeate military operations, our policies must evolve at the same pace. I hope this conversation helps spark further discussion among policymakers, technologists, and civil society about how we can responsibly navigate this new era of warfare. Thanks again for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Let's keep pushing for responsible AI, whatever the outcome.
Absolutely, responsible innovation is the only way forward.